Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Living Torah in your living room. And we're going to look at the portion of Tetzaveh, but also follow on a little bit from last week's portion, because essentially they are two of the same. They are all about the instruction to build the sanctuary, and then in conjunction with that, of course, the instruction about the need to make the necessary priestly garb per this week's portion, so that the Kohanim would then be able to do the necessary service in that sanctuary. So let's consider. The Jews left Egypt. They crossed the sea. They got the Torah at Sinai, and now they're being told to build a sanctuary in the desert. My question is, how does that fit into the equation of things? I mean, what is the significance of this sanctuary? Does God really need a holy abode? He was doing pretty good amongst the people, helping them through their crises up until this point. Now, it's true, of course, we Jews, we like to build, we love to extend, we enjoy renovating, even though we're pretty lousy at DIY. But why the need for this sudden instruction? Why here? Why now? There was a teacher who once asked her class where they thought God was. The first, Billy, said, God is in my heart. The second, Joey, said, God is in my mind. The third, Sally, said, God is in the bathroom. And the teacher, so perturbed, Sally, why ever would you say that? To which she replied, because every morning my dad is banging away on the bathroom door, yelling, Dear God, are you still in there? So where is God really? You know, the world has an expression, the devil is in the detail. It's a phrase, actually, that was coined by some German pop musician, Lixa Bargeld. Fundamental to Jewish belief is that God is in the detail. We might think he only exists in the grand and the splendor, only in the big stuff, you know, the exodus from Egypt, the splitting of the sea, the giving of the Torah at Sinai, all which we just finished reading about. The truth is, he's every bit, and in a way even more so, as it were, in the small stuff, in the fine detail of every fine act of kindness committed. When we recite Kiddush on Friday night, as we've mentioned previously, we talk about how God created the world, and we say the words, Asher bara Elokim la'asot, that which God created to do. What does it mean to do? God created the world. What more is there to do? Well, here's a question for you. If you were allowed to be God for a day, what would you do? How might you choose to do things differently than that in which they are already done? Because consider the question, it says a lot about you. Three great rabbis were once discussing this very point. Each suggested that they would do something different if they were God. The first said he would ensure that there'd be no illness in the world. The second said he would make sure that there'd be no poverty in the world. The third, the famed Rabbi Shner Zalman of Liadi, he contemplated for a bit, and then he said, if I was God, I would do everything exactly the same as it is now. And what he was saying, on the one hand, was simply that to suggest that you would do things differently means that, I don't know, God got it wrong, in which case he's not perfect, in which case he can't really be God. But he was saying something so much more than that as well. Yes, there are obvious imperfections in our world. Yes, there are certain apparent faults and flaws in the system, if you like. But all that is with very deliberate spiritual intent. If everything was perfect in our world, if everybody had what they needed and never required to be reliant on others, then there would be no opportunity to show kindness, to show benevolence in our world. That which God created to do. He created, but he also left intentional gaps for you and me to do. And the point is, therefore, that when you are reaching out to someone else, when you extend yourself to do a kindness, you are filling the deliberate gaps and thereby partnering God in the creation process. Every time you do something good, you do something special, you do something meaningful, no matter how trivial you might presume it to be, you're doing much more than just helping another person. You're literally bringing more spiritual energy and meaning into the world by virtue of partnering God and achieving that which he had intended and wanted for you to do in the first instance. You see, if life is to have meaning, we have to be prepared to give into it at least as much as we seek to take out from it. People in pursuit of dreams are all too often frustrated and perplexed when they may not find what they're looking for. And even as they may discover that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, they're still plagued with a sense of unfulfilled emptiness, because they go looking to see what's in it for me. But the real question is, what are you prepared to put in? And when we are motivated by goals that have deep meaning, or by dreams that need completion, or by pure love that needs expressing, then we have to be prepared to invest at least as much as we anticipate taking out. Giving charity never lessens the purse. Giving love never weakens the heart. Giving time never depletes energy. Indeed, the very act of giving enables you to accumulate as well. It transforms your personality. It does something to your soul. And of course, it enhances your own self-esteem. You get appreciation by giving it. You get love by reciprocating it. You get wealth by sharing it. You get happiness by spreading it. That's the reality of how it works in our personal relationships and really in our interaction with others and the world. So the instruction to make a sanctuary was in response to an atonement for making the golden calf. Even though it doesn't entirely follow in chronological order, there is the instruction in last week and this week's portion. Then there's the story of the golden calf, which we read about next week. And then there is the actual construction, the actual physical making of everything, fulfilling the directives in the subsequent two portions. The question is this: what is the correlation between the two? What's the connection between the making of a golden calf and the making of a sanctuary? Well, when you spend your life in relentless pursuit of the next conquest, when life is more about worshiping oneself and less about helping another, then frankly, the end result is golden calves. Do you know, in 2008, you might well recall, there was the collapse of world markets. The last thing sold in Sotheby's just 2 days before the collapse of world markets was a sculpture by Damien Hirst. It sold for 10.5 million pounds. What was it a sculpture of? It was a calf made from solid gold and otherwise labeled as the golden calf. You see, when the medium of exchange gets turned into an egocentric object of worship, you wind up with a golden calf. In life, the number one excuse for people aborting something, whether it's a project, whether it's a relationship, or even their faith, is simply, it doesn't do anything for me. But how much have you invested of yourself before reaching that conclusion? How much emotion or how much of your soul did you deposit in order to be able to claim the rights to withdraw? Isn't it funny how 1 hour seems so long when we pray and so short when we watch a football game? Isn't it funny how when a game goes into overtime, people get so excited, but if Shoal lasts 2 minutes longer than necessary, they complain? Or how some find reading a whole Torah portion tedious, but not so when it comes to reading 100 pages of the latest novel. You see, those things that nurture me, I clamor for. Those things that involve giving of me, investing of my soul, stepping out of my comfort zone, I shy away from. The message in the sanctuary is you make a living by what you get, but you make a life by what you give. What you give is not always important. How you give is. If more people would get that balance right, they would find greater fulfillment in their relationships, more meaning in their faith, and indeed there'd be much more kindness in our world. But then there's something else to consider in this regard, a more general question. Because I've sometimes wondered, how is it that a young, fledgling Jewish nation, having just emerged from such lengthy and extensive servitude, can so readily embrace divinity? They're so happy to give, to build, to get so involved in the spiritual euphoria of all the experience. Previously, they only knew the dictate of man. Pharaoh, how did they shift so radically to this stage now of building a spiritual abode, as it were, for God? How come they so willingly accept the Torah, the plethora of laws that follow the instruction then with the making of a sanctuary? Ask yourself whether you would. I mean, if we went through a long trial and tribulation, sometimes we might be more inclined to just get angry with God and far less inclined to start embracing him even more so. We have such a hard time adhering to a bare minimum. How come they unwaveringly comply? Or to dare put the question differently, what is it about God that makes people so conforming? Is it the fear of a lightning bolt striking? Are our life's models really predicated on fear and conscience? So again, perhaps something of an answer lies in the following analysis. Why do we feel as though sometimes we're not getting through to other people? We sense that no matter how hard we try, they're just not getting it. You're not getting me, whether your kids, your spouses, colleagues, they just don't get what you're trying to say. Harvey Ginsburg was convinced that his wife was going deaf. She refused to go to an audiologist, insisting that there was nothing wrong with her. So he asked his doctor, what do I do? He says, it's very simple. Start at the door of the room. Tell her something in a normal tone of voice. If she doesn't respond, move a little bit closer, still using a normal tone of voice. That should tell you just how bad her hearing is. Ginsburg saw his wife doing the dishes in the kitchen, stood by the doorway and said, I love you, my darling. No response. He moved a few steps into the room and repeated, I love you, my darling. Still no response. He moved closer until he could almost touch her, and he repeated, I love you, my darling, at which point his wife turned around and said, Harvey, for the third time, I love you too. When others aren't hearing you, the question is the problem really with them, or is it perhaps with you? Sometimes the case, is it not, that a brilliant scholar or orator may convey a profound idea that simply doesn't resonate with his listeners, while another far less erudite person might communicate a thought that is not as cerebral, but really impacts with his audience? The answer, and frankly, the secret to all communication, lies in one unusual four-letter word with which God began all of the instruction and all of the communication with his people. The Ten Commandments, the Torah, the making of the sanctuary, the priestly garb, all of it. And it all begins with the word Anochi. It is how God started the Ten Commandments. And he said, Anochi, I, the Lord, your God, took you out from Egypt. Now you ask any Hebrew-speaking individual, what is the correct pronoun for the word I? And they will tell you, I is Ani. Go to Israel. Ani rotzeh, I want. Ani. Where does the word Anochi come from? It's actually of Egyptian origin, and the Talmud explains Anochi is an acronym for Ana Nafshi Savit Yahavit, which simply translates to mean I placed my essence into these writings. And what God in effect is saying is these commandments that I give you, they're not something remote, detached from me. They're not something distant and separate to me. They are me. The words conveyed are from the depths of my essence. And when you absorb them and you integrate them and you adhere to them, you are essentially connecting to my thoughts, my ideals, whereby, of course, you are connecting to me. There are essentially two types of messages that we tend to convey. Those that are but mere words, which echo in the hollow and then reverberate into the ear of those within proximity. And then there are those words they're not words at all. They're just you. They're your heart. They are your deepest thoughts. They are your emotions, which words cannot adequately describe. But there really is no other way to communicate them. So you express them through words. And those words penetrate the very depths and inner recesses of another soul. If you want to know whether when someone says, I love you, they mean it or not, just look inside yourself. If the words ring hollow and you remain untouched, that really reflects the reality of the one who's saying it. On the other hand, when expressed from someone who is speaking from the heart, you'll feel it. That will rock your world. It's the way our sages tell us, words that leave the heart penetrate the heart. All of the words spoken by God, starting from the Ten Commandments, they penetrated the consciousness of all of existence. It forms the backbone of all of religion because they weren't just expressed as ani, merely I, as though detached from their author. But Anochi, Ana Nafshi Savit Yahavit, God's very essence was contained within those words. Bertrand Russell, the 20th century British philosopher and ethicist, was once asked how he could behave unethically, as he was seen to be doing on occasion, to which he replied, I'm also a teacher of mathematics, and I'm not a triangle. Academics often take pride in their detachment. They say, I can be completely knowledgeable of a given topic, and it has nothing to do with my behavior. Russell typically follows the trend of do as I say, not as I do, where we seek to justify why we compartmentalize our ideals and our actions. What you teach is not necessarily what you do, and vice versa. Your writing does not necessarily reflect your soul. Contrast that with Maimonides, who writes that a true scholar is recognized not by his scholastic ability alone, but even more so by his actions, how he talks, how he walks, how she sleeps, and how they do business. He only truly knows what he knows, Maimonides is saying, when he has integrated the knowledge within himself in a seamless flow between knowledge and behavior. Maimonides is following the lead of Anochi, seamless integration between soul and words. You are what you teach, and you teach what you are. You know, we live in a highly fragmented and compartmentalized world. Initially, we seem all separate from one another, each of us with our own range of experiences, different exposures and life trajectories. That's why we never quite hear what one another is saying. Let's face it, today people express their deepest sentiments on social media. They say, I love you in WhatsApp. They say, I'm sorry on Twitter. They ask after your well-being on Facebook Messenger. True communication is built upon true connection. It's not merely the process of conveying messages, ideas, and feelings. It's about creating a relationship, a connection, and a bond between those communicating with each other. Imagine how people would react to you if they heard your spirit singing instead of your body whining. They heard your beckoning soul instead of your hawking mouthpiece. If they heard your gentle words instead of your aggressive demands. Words from the heart enter the heart. And a word that is lacking in sincerity and soulfulness will not resonate. True communication means that you say what you are and you are what you say, whereby your every utterance becomes a transparent channel of your soul's expression. And that's why when people talk about communication breakdown, whether amongst friends, work colleagues, even in relationships, it's not because we don't know how to convey the sentiment or someone simply isn't listening. It's because what is being said is not necessarily being meant. If you don't truly feel your own sentiment, don't expect another to feel it either. And always remember that the people won't care about how much you know until they know about how much you care. You may expound brilliant ideas. You may be an eloquent orator, but your words won't resonate until your listener feels your soul being expressed in your words. Invest your anochi, your essence in your words, and people will respond. That's what God did. He literally began everything with anochi, and people knew it, and people felt it, and it resonated with them. And therefore, everything that God asked of them after to do, they connected with. They felt it, they embraced it, they took on the 10 Commandments, they accepted the Torah, they went and gave up so much of their gold and silver for the building of a sanctuary. They adhered to every dictate and demand made of them because they knew that God cared. They knew Anochi, God is with me in this, and therefore I want to be with him. The communication was two-way. So next time you and your spouse or your child or your friend or your work colleague or anyone else besides might be having communication issues, try a new tactic. Learn from God. Call it the Anochi method. Feel what you want to say, and then speak from your heart and soul, and watch the magic and observe the results. If it worked for God all those years ago, it can work for you too, so that you, like he, can also build your own edifice, your own home. You, like he, can bring your own soothing and stillness to an otherwise turbulent world. We should all indeed find success